Morning, everybody. Or good afternoon, everybody. One more time. Good afternoon, everybody. All right, making sure you're listening. All right, let's get started. Welcome to the 2024 Greater Dallas Planning Council meeting. It's great to see everyone here today. As we take care of some GDP business, please be sure to enjoy your lunch. My name is Ruben Landa, and I'm the president of the Greater Dallas Planning Council and vice president of WSP USA. We're very grateful to have all of you here today for our annual signature event. This is our second major event this month, 1 week removed from having our special sports economics forum with Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and Kimberly Tolbert, interim city manager for the city of Dallas. How many of you attended last week's event? Raise your hand. All right, there you go. I love that. It was a great event. It was really a great discussion about professional sports in Dallas and so much more. Dallas is truly one of the great sports cities in the U.S. and the world. Thanks for supporting us with last week's event, and thank you for your continued support by being here today to participate in a meaningful discussion about housing public policy. We hope that you've enjoyed the earlier sessions this morning and are ready to hear more from our esteemed luncheon speakers. I would be remiss if I did not spend some time to really thank many people and companies who have made our two events possible. We're very appreciative for the gracious support from our many sponsors and supporters. This includes our diamond sponsors of Luis Spinola with Azteca Omega, Willis Johnson with JBJ Management, and Michael Russell with H.J. Russell and Company. Also our platinum sponsors of WSP USA, and our gold sponsors, Fortis Engineers, King & George LLC, Hewlett-Zollars, and Kirksey Architecture, in addition to the multitude of silver agency and board sponsors. I sincerely appreciate your support and commitment to the GDPC. It is to you that we are able to host last week's Sports Economics Forum and today's annual meeting. Let's give them all a round of applause for their support and generosity. I also want to thank Dallas City Council Member Chad West for District 1 and Council Member Zarin Gracie for District 3 for kicking off our breakfast networker. I also want to thank Amaruka, our senior analysis from HR&A, for introducing this morning's sessions. Let's give them all a round of applause for getting it kicked off. I also want to recognize some of our dignitaries, and please forgive me if I miss anybody, as I've been up here and I didn't really get to see everybody walk in. But I'd like to recognize Dr. Teresa Daniel, Commissioner for Dallas County District 1, Cameron Rayburn, yes, go ahead. Cameron Rayburn, the mayor of the city of Ennis. We also have Paul Ridley, Dallas City Council District 14, and also former president of the GDPC. And we also have Gay Donald Willis, councilwoman for District 13. Let's all give them a round of applause. And if there's any other elected officials, please stand. Am I missing anybody? We got them. Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your participation. And speaking of the two morning sessions, what an amazing group of experts we assembled. I'd like to thank Santosh George and Jack Brzezinski, co-chairs of the GDPC Urban Design Task Force, for providing excellent management of those two sessions. I would also like to extend special thanks to our session panelists and moderators. For session 1, Maggie Parker with Innovan Neighborhoods, Brian Toney, Dallas Housing Coalition, Jennifer Scripps, Downtown Dallas Inc., Ken Malcolmson, North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, and Travis Reynolds, the Dallas Regional Chamber. Also for session 2, Thomas Simpson with HR&A, John Lettler with City of Frisco, Thor Erickson, Housing and Neighborhood Revitalization for the City of Dallas, and Rodney Moss, Hunt Development Group, and of course Todd LaRue, Robert Charles Lesher and Company. Your level of experience and knowledge about housing from the grassroots and private-public sector perspective has really set the stage for discussion today. Thanks for your words of wisdom and showing everyone here that there are truly workable solutions that we can utilize to fix our housing problems. Let's give them a round of applause. A lot of thank yous here, but I have to do it. I also like to thank the GDPC executive team. They're one of a kind. This team is exceptionally talented. Professional leaders have been so supportive of me and our efforts to sustain GDPC as a premier planning organization for DFW. You know me, I'm always on the go, always constantly looking for ways to enhance GDPC and provide the strongest programming possible. But I could not implement our ideas without the assistance and support of a great executive committee. And of course, nothing would be possible without the support of the GDPC Board of Directors. The board has been open-minded and very supportive of our strategic plan and our efforts to grow the organization. I would like to ask the executive committee and the board to please stand and be recognized at this time. Stand up, I know you're here. There you go. You guys are great. Thank you very much for your support and all the things you do for the GDPC. Finally, putting together an event of this size is always a challenge, but is manageable when you have the right support system. I want to thank Jair Aboud, Vice President of Marketing and Communications, Ryan Waters, Chairman of the Art Marketing and Communications Committee, David Alexander, Vice President of Programs, and David Retch, Vice President of Issues, and of course Donna Hegdahl and Donna Trowbridge with TransEnergy Group. Each of you worked tirelessly to help me execute these two special events. You guys are rock stars, and you should be recognized for your excellent efforts. Let's give them a round of applause for all the hard work they did to make this possible. All right. No more thank yous. Now I'd like to invite Carmen Garcia, former president of the GDPC and member of the membership committee, who will give a quick update on membership. Carmen?
Thank you, Ruben. Good afternoon, everybody. Oh my goodness, this is just absolutely phenomenal. Thank you all for joining us here today. As Ruben mentioned, the membership committee is very, very engaged, and unfortunately, our vice president of membership could not be here today, Vince Tam, but I want to give her and the committee members, if you'd stand up, a big round of applause. They've done an outstanding job. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. We're a team here. Everybody's part of this membership initiative, and first and foremost, though, I want to thank each and every member. This is our annual meeting. I want to thank you all for being an active member of our organization. So thank you, our members, our current members, and all of those volunteers that have helped us throughout the year. And look at this room. That just shows you how much of an impact we're making here in the region. I also want to say that we have various new memberships, but through our membership committee, we added a couple of new memberships. One of them was our nonprofit public sector, and the other is our small business, because they're all part of this integral part of what we're doing within the organization. So if you're in that category or other categories, we want you to come and join our organization. You can see from the programs that we've had, our breakfast meetings, we have a very engaged task forces. If you don't know who they are, go to the website. They're in this very room working hard to make our organization what it is today. But we wouldn't be here if you all were not part of these initiatives and programs that we're doing here in the region. So, and membership is not just about architects and engineers. As I became one of the presidents of this organization, I said, I'm not an architect or a planner, but guess what? I have learned so much these years that I've been engaged with GDPC, so please come and join us. Now, we have an event coming up. We have a fall social, September the 18th. You'll be getting information about that. This year, as of last year too, we wanted to focus on the State Fair of Texas, so our theme is the State Fair of Texas. And guess what? We're gonna have some amazing drawings, but here's the catch. In order to be eligible for those drawings, you need to ride DART. DART is right across the street from where we're gonna have this event, so I encourage you to ride DART, not just there, but everywhere. Why do I say that? Because I'm on the board of DART. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for being here. We are a very engaged organization, and it's because of each and every one of you. Muchísimas gracias. Nos veremos pronto.
You have been told you must use DART, so be there. All right, guys. Thank you, Carmen. Please continue to enjoy your chicken surprise, and we'll be back to get the program started soon. Thank you.
The biggest challenge we have in the city right now is housing and the lack of affordable housing in Dallas. We are about 10 years behind cities on the West Coast and East Coast and Austin on the explosion of population moving in, but it's coming because of how fast we're growing. We don't want to wait until we're at the crisis level of your entire workforce not being able to live in the city anymore before we address it. So to be responsible stewards of our city, to be responsible advocates like yourselves, we need to take steps now to sort of start plugging the leaky roof so that it doesn't collapse on us.
So post-pandemic, our families have been hit hard in our community. We've seen an incredible surge of new people coming into our community, which is great. We've seen companies come into our community, which is great. But then the affordable housing goes by the wayside, right?
Absolutely.
Right. So you have a flat tire, you have some simple thing that the rest of us would go, that's annoying, right?
Yeah.
That's, I can't pay the rent,
Right.
right?
It's so important to get together as a group of professionals because you can learn about best practices across the country. You might be sitting at a table or next to somebody who has lived in a city like San Francisco that has an incredibly challenging housing crisis there, or a city like Denver, which has got a rising homelessness situation. And then learning the problems in these different cities and then bringing that to the table to come together with a solution is so important. If we as a city value having our workforce here, if we value having a city where our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, our nurses can live, we've got to take steps now to actually make that happen. It's so important for GDPC and the people who are members of the Greater Dallas Planning Council to first understand the housing problem that we have in the city right now, housing being the lack thereof, and then get engaged. If you are a planner, an architect, an engineer, or other professional in the city of Dallas in this world of design, and you're not already engaged in the housing conversation, you're really not doing your fiduciary duty to your profession. This is so important to the city. It is our #1 issue that we're facing right now, and it's not just us. It's a regional issue as well. I absolutely encourage people to come to this luncheon, deep dive on housing, and then take that with you when you leave and actually go out and start advocating, show up to city council meetings, talk to your council member, and then be ready when you're asked a question as a professional to answer it in a way that can make that person think about what they can do to help with our housing situation.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started. Let's get the program started. To start us off, I would like to invite David Retch, our Vice President of Issues with the Greater Dallas Planning Council, who's going to introduce our speakers. So, David?
Thank you, Ruben, and good afternoon. It's nice to see another terrific turnout here at our annual meeting. As Ruben said, I'm on the board and executive committee of Greater Dallas Planning, something I'm very proud of. And in my free time, I work for BGE as an urban designer, landscape architect. I want to shout out for my employer who helps enable my participation in this organization, like many of you do. And I really believe that we're doing great things for the betterment of Greater Dallas. I'm honored to present our speakers today, our panelists on housing. And housing's a special topic for us this year. We determined last year as part of our strategic plan to focus on several key topics, housing being one. So throughout the year, we've featured housing at our monthly breakfast series meetings. We hold those at Park Cities Club. I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. If not, come on out and see them. They're really tremendous on a monthly basis. We also have had meetings through our 5 task forces. and we anticipate more meetings through the rest of this year. Speaking of which, we will have a follow-up to this meeting on housing September 5th through our Urban Design Task Force. You can look online at gdpc.org to stay connected and get details on all of our events. Our board and executive committee see housing as a significant issue, one with many factors and many facets: affordability, product diversity, equitable distribution, to name a few. It's also an issue that is not likely to go away anytime soon as our region continues to grow. Therefore, GDPC is focused on raising awareness and seeking positive solutions that benefit all sectors of our community. We encourage wise housing strategies that are good for citizens and business alike, while catering to a host of incomes and products appropriate to an urbanizing region. With that, I'll introduce our speakers who will dig into all of this more. From the West Coast, we're glad to have Shane Phillips with us, who is a housing researcher, writer, and consultant. He manages the Randall Lewis Housing Initiative at UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies, where he produces and hosts the UCLA Housing Voice podcast. That's a bi-weekly show that translates emerging policy research for a non-academic audience. He's also the author of the book, The Affordable City, which advocates for prioritizing supply, stability, and subsidies while offering more than 50 strategies on housing affordability. Shane has consulted for cities across the country, like Reno, Nevada, Grand Rapids, and Hendersonville, North Carolina, given keynote presentations on various statewide housing issues and associations, trade groups, regional advocacy organizations, and conferences. He earned his bachelor's in biochemistry at University of Washington and a master's in public administration and urban planning from USC. Then, our East Coast representative, Carol Redmond-Naughton, is the Chief Executive Officer of Purpose-Built Communities Foundation. Purpose-Built supports local leaders who are implementing resident-centered, holistic, and cross-sector neighborhood revitalization initiatives that create pathways to prosperity. Carol sets the strategic vision for the organization with a focus on growth, development, and impact of Purpose-Built, its network, and the communities that it serves. She's been with the organization since its inception in 2009 and has an impressive list of prior experience as an attorney. Beyond her work with Purpose-Built, she volunteers for a number of local and national organizations, is currently the global trustee for the Urban Land Institute, and serves as a member of the Fifth Third Bank National Community Advisory Committee. Recognized as a leader in place-based partnerships, neighborhood revitalization, and community development, Carol's published works have been featured in Huffington Post, TEDx Atlanta, the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, and nonprofit finance funds book, Investing in Results. She graduated from Colgate with a bachelor's in political science and Emory University School of Law with a Juris Doctor. And then, from good old Middle America, specifically Dallas, Texas, Ashley Flores. She is Chief of Housing at the Child Poverty Action Lab. They like to go by CPAL, a nonprofit organization committed to cutting Dallas's child poverty in half within 20 years. In a role, Ashley leads transformative systems-level projects to ensure that all families have access to housing that is healthy, safe, affordable, stable, and in a thriving community. Prior to CPAL, Ashley was an education strategist with Dallas-based global architecture firm HKS, where she worked to elevate importance of the built environment for K through 12 district and higher education clients. She also served as Director of Planning and Special Projects at DSID, championing the district's work on innovative school design and personalized learning, as well as low-performing school turnaround. She earned her degrees in business administration and liberal arts from the University of Texas at Austin, it's a place that Ruben Landa founded, I think, and in education policy and management from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And now for our esteemed moderator, and I shall say, all-around good guy, Cullum Clark is director of the Bush Institute SMU Economic Growth Initiative, and he's an adjunct economics professor at SMU. His work focuses on creating prosperous, high-opportunity cities as a path to improving economic mobility in America. He also advances the Bush Institute's principle of private markets humanized by compassionate government. He co-authored a 2021 book, The Texas Triangle, An Emerging Power in Global Economy. His work has appeared in City Journal, Real Clear Policy, and numerous other publications. He recently published an extensive report on the role of universities and academic medical centers in local and regional economies, and is currently working on an important report on housing supply and affordability in U.S. cities. Cullum serves on board of the Texas Charter School Network, Uplift Education, and on several foundations and endowment boards. He's a very busy guy. He earned his BA in history from Yale, a master's in political science from Harvard, and a PhD in economics from SMU. So please give a warm Greater Dallas welcome to our panelists and Cullum, who will take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Cullum Clark, and I am thrilled and honored to be moderating this panel with three phenomenal experts. So really terrific to be doing this. Let me thank Ruben and David for having us all and putting this great event together. We saw it a little bit at the Skunk Works, what was happening. It was one of the most beautifully planned big events I've ever seen in my life. So well done, and even more to the point to GDPC for taking on the vitally important challenge of housing in our community and beyond. Congratulations and thank you. So as David was nice enough to mention, I'm working on a kind of a pretty big data-rich report on housing. It's been immersed in it. It's been my life here now for a few months. And in it, we will estimate that America has underbuilt housing units by something between 5 and 7 million, with the vast majority of that shortfall occurring since the year 2000, really mostly since the year 2008. As a result, we estimate that prices relative to incomes, rents, all up and down the income distribution are something on the order of 30 to 40% higher than they would be if the market was relatively well functioning and if we had what you might call as semi-reasonable policies. And so one other thing I would say is I was recently asked to start serving on a group called the National Housing Crisis Task Force, and one of the first principles of this whole exercise is that we will in fact treat the housing crisis like a crisis. And that is what I suggest that we do in this conversation today. Now, I'm going to ask questions that are primarily about how we actually create the supply of housing units of all kinds that America needs, and also by extension North Texas needs. There's not time to do everything. There are a lot of other important issues around like renter protections and so forth that if you all want to ask about, then please do. And if any of you all want to jump into it, let's do that. But on the supply side, let me just give a couple of quick comments and then I'll get things going with our group. Broadly speaking, you can break down the whole housing supply challenge into two buckets. I think, as everyone here is aware, you can break it down into the first idea is that we need to build market rate housing at a much faster pace. For what it's worth, in our report, we will say that between now and the year 2050, to keep up with population growth, which is slower than it used to be, but it's still happening, and to fill that roughly $6 million unit gap that's been created, we need to be building at about 1.5, 1.6 times the current rate in America. It's a giant challenge, and if we don't meet it, the problem will undoubtedly grow worse. So when we talk about how to accelerate building, there are major questions that come to mind. We've all talked about density today. How much densification in built-up areas is really actually going to be realistic, given both the physical and the political challenges of our time? How about the role of state preemption? To what degree should state governments, or for that matter, the federal government, override restrictive local policies? What does it mean if metropolitan areas are going to hopefully grow upward some, but they're undoubtedly going to grow outwards? They've been doing that, and it's really likely it will keep happening. What would it mean to do that smartly? Maybe we could do better on that front. And is there a role for technical innovation, how we build? Something, I don't know how to build anything, but maybe the people in the panel will know more about this than me. The other bucket, of course, is subsidized, affordable housing that is income restricted in some form or another. Here, I think a big question we talked about at dinner that I think I'll want to highlight with the group is, given non-infinite resources, how do we stretch those resources as far as possible to help as many Americans and as many Dallasites as possible? Is there, for example, a case for more preserve, buy, and rehab strategies, even if it comes at the expense of new builds? Just raising the question. Do we need new funding mechanisms in America beyond the mainstays that we have today? How much, we've heard about this earlier today, how much when we execute affordable housing policy should we focus on the issue of location, that it's really important to build in this location and not that location, recognizing that too can create challenges, and to what degree are there trade-offs between these two buckets? And the last question, before getting in with the group, is going beyond housing, really, because I think we really need to think of it in a broader context. And the question is, how can we create holistic, thriving communities in which people can afford to live and also live a flourishing life with good economic mobility and opportunity? So I hope that's enough to set the stage. I'm going to ask a lead-off question to everyone, and maybe we'll just start here with my local friend, my very good friend Ashley. Let me also say welcome to Dallas, new friends from Atlanta and Los Angeles. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
So Ashley, we'll start with you, but I'll just ask the question. We'll go down the way. Tell us about your organization and the work you're doing on housing, and I'd really especially love to hear what's the biggest goal you're trying to achieve and what's top of mind.
Thanks, Colum. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with everyone. So at the Child Poverty Action Lab, or CPAL, we're a nonprofit organization based here in Dallas. We were founded in 2018 as a byproduct of former Mayor Rawlings' task force on poverty. And as was mentioned earlier, we exist to cut child poverty in half in Dallas within a generation. And we do that in a couple of ways. We do that by working to unlock and democratize data related to issues associated with economic mobility. We believe that better data leads to better decisions, and better decisions can lead to better outcomes. We also work to connect the dots between our public agency partners and nonprofits and other organizations working on these issues so that we can all work together in mutually reinforcing ways. And third, we work to do sort of problem solving in partnership with the community against these issues that we see that are bumping up against economic mobility. In particular, at CPAL, we work on 5 big bets. I lead our housing portfolio, but we also have teams working on benefits access and utilization, meaning access to benefits like WIC and SNAP and other benefits that can really support a family's economic well-being. We also have teams working on maternal health, public safety, and criminal justice. In the housing space, we organize our portfolio around 4 dimensions of housing that research is very clear most matter for kids and their families. The first is housing quality, so quality of the built environment of the home. Is it free of environmental hazards? Is it a safe place for a child to grow up, to thrive both from a health and well-being perspective, but also a great place to do their homework, to play with their siblings, a great healthy place to live. We also work on issues related to affordability, which will be mostly what we talk about today, so issues of supply and demand, particularly in the rental market for low-income renters. We look at whether or not families in Dallas are able to pay their rent or their mortgage and still have plenty left over for their other expenses and for savings. We also work on housing location, which is about the neighborhood that a housing unit is located in. And we work on issues related to housing stability, which is whether or not a family can stay put in their home without the worry or the threat of a looming move due to eviction or other forms of involuntary displacement. So those are the four big issues, I would say. I don't think I can pick just one, Colin, but we can get into them more as the discussion unfolds.
Thanks, Ashley. Carol, purpose-built communities, what's top of mind?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name's Carol Naughton. I'm glad to be here. What's top of mind to me is really trying to take advantage of, I think, this idea that neighborhoods really matter. I think neighborhoods are having a moment. And at Purpose-Built, we are neighborhoodists. Say that with me, neighborhoodist. It doesn't roll off the tongue easily, but when you're a neighborhoodist, you realize that neighborhoods impact people in really fundamental ways. So many of the resources that we have access to are in our neighborhoods, and the question is, does your neighborhood provide you with the tools and the opportunities to be able to move forward in life, or does your neighborhood throw up obstacle after obstacle after obstacle in terms of substandard housing and schools that aren't performing and issues around safety and employment opportunities, all of those kinds of things. So we work with folks all around the country to strengthen neighborhoods so that they become pathways to prosperity for the lowest income families. We only work where we're invited. And as a result of this idea that neighborhoods are having a moment and that place really matters when you're thinking about economic mobility and the opportunity for low-income kids to not need affordable housing when they're adults, right? How do we think about housing in that context? How do we think about neighborhoods in that context? And so that's what we're really leaning into right now.
Thank you. Shane, I feel like we're at one of those dinner tables that from a cartoon, you know, it's really, really long. But tell us about your organization and what's top of mind.
We were very far away. Well, it is great to be here. Thank you for having me. This is my first time in Dallas in almost a decade. As I was talking about earlier, I wish I could have come when it was a little easier to walk around, but I'm going to do my best to see as much of the city as I can over the next 24 hours or so. But the Lewis Center is really focused on adding to the knowledge base, the evidentiary basis around what works and what doesn't in housing policy, whether your goal is affordability or reducing homelessness or improving housing stability or a million other things. One real focus for me in particular is making sure that we're getting the research that's happening in academia out to a much wider audience, and so that's why we create the UCLA Housing Voice podcasts. We have something like 75 episodes now, about an hour each, and those feature interviews with researchers kind of targeted at a non-academic audience, and that's frankly my favorite part of my job. And there's just so much knowledge in academia that never reaches outside of it because of paywall journals, just because it is very complicated to read through. And so it's been a really great opportunity. Beyond that, and even beyond UCLA, one of my really big interests is in trying to tie together a lot of different, as I said, these different goals of affordability, stability, reducing homelessness, et cetera, and showing how they are linked together, and things that are often seen as undermining one another or in competition with one another can be designed in ways that they are instead complementary to each other. Just for example, the policies that you would want to do to increase the supply of deed-restricted, below-market affordable housing, or actually the policies you would want to increase market rate production also benefit affordable housing. Zoning policies that kind of spread things around a little bit more actually reduce the likelihood of displacement when you don't put all of the capacity for new housing into existing renter communities. Those kinds of connections, and trying to kind of build coalitions and partnerships off of those realities.
Terrific. Shane, let's stay with you. Lessons from California. Are we here just following in your footsteps, but 2 to 3 decades behind? What can we learn?
You are following in our footsteps, and I think that is sobering for people to hear. I think people imagine that Los Angeles is just this entirely different world, that Dallas could never look anything like that. Frankly, you already do look a lot like that, flying through, driving through. The policies are very, very similar. I think the biggest difference really is that we ran out of room to sprawl a few decades ago. You haven't quite gotten there yet, but you will run out. We kept sprawling until it became another metro area. You're not quite there, but it seems like you're not far off. And I realize people don't like to be compared to California, especially Los Angeles. I don't blame you. When I travel around the country, especially to more conservative places, I'm always careful to say I am not here to tell you to do what California and Los Angeles are doing. I'm here to tell you, don't do what we did. Stop doing what we did, because you're doing it right now. So I don't think in 15 years, North Texas will be as expensive as Los Angeles, but I think in 10 or 15 years, it may be as expensive as Los Angeles is now, and Los Angeles will be as expensive as San Francisco is now, and San Francisco will have fallen into the ocean or something. But you're on that trajectory right now, and so I think it's important to act ambitiously and urgently to avoid a similar fate.
Ooh, that is bracing. Carol, how about lessons from Atlanta, and in particular from the East Lake community? If we all want to be neighborhoodists, what have you learned about how to do smart neighborhooding?
Yeah, so thank you for that. So one thing I was really excited about from the first two panels today is how many times I heard the words mixed income. That y'all are thinking about ways of developing affordable housing and integrating it into a larger housing strategy that serves people across a really broad range of incomes. That's one of the first takeaways, I would say, especially if your end game is creating economic mobility. Delivering affordable housing in a mixed income, a truly mixed income model, hits all of the right things. It creates the opportunity for mixed income schools, neighborhood serving schools. It creates the opportunity for the kinds of things that Raj Chetty and Opportunity Insights has identified as real levers of change about economic connectedness, relationships between people with different economic, social levels, right? So creating mixed income is really important, and finding ways to sustain it, right? Rodney's remarks this morning were really important about creating, the math has to work, right, in order to be able to do this. How do you figure out how you incent developers to do this? How do you figure out how you can sustain it long term? East Lake's been around now for 30 years. And I was a child when I started working on it, thank you very much. And we just refinanced the villages of East Lake to the tune of $80 million or something to renovate every single apartment and then add everything from a community land trust to a new phase of building. And we did that because it's working, right? There's another development that was built at the same time that's now being demolished because it's not getting good outcomes for people. So I think really thinking about, are we building things, and what are the lessons learned about housing strategies, affordability, tying to education in ways that create real economic mobility. That's my message here.
Great. All right. Ashley, I know you well enough to know that you've studied this topic exhaustively. Could you say a little bit about what you've learned about, let's talk about the market rate world for a moment, and I promise everyone will be in the deed-restricted world here in a few minutes. But how is the housing market failing the low-income and moderate-income families of Dallas?
Well, the short answer is we're just not delivering enough units. We're also not preserving enough units that are affordable to our lowest income renters. And just to unpack that a little bit, last year CPAL worked with HRNA advisors on a rental housing needs assessment for the city of Dallas. We looked just at the rental housing market. We know the majority of residents in the city are renters. And so when we started looking at the data, we were really interested in bringing specificity to a really general problem statement. We've been saying for years, we need more housing, we need more housing. But we hadn't really dug much deeper than that. We hadn't said, well, how much housing do we need, affordable at what income levels, what are the unit sizes that we need to meet family needs in our community? And so with HRNA, we started to try and answer some of those questions. And what we found is that we have a gap in supply and demand for our renters who are at 50% area median income or less, which is between $44,000 and $45,000 a year in 2021 dollars. And so that gap specifically, we're lacking 33,660 affordable rental units for our lowest income renters in Dallas. We don't see big gaps at higher income bands. The market is generally serving those needs, at least today. And so we have this acute shortage of units for our lowest income renters, and we expect that shortage just to grow, to get bigger. So between now and 2030, we expect that around 34,000 unit gap to grow by 50,000 units. So by 2030, we're expecting a gap at or below 50% AMI around 84,000 units. So we're just so few available affordable units for our low-income renters. We are the Child Poverty Action Lab, so we think a lot about families. And when we dig even further into the data on what's missing, what we're not addressing in the market for renters, we see that our larger household sizes in particular are having a hard time finding affordable rental units. So when we look at households that have 4 or more people at or below 50% AMI, we made an assumption that they might be looking for a 3-bedroom rental. Well, when we look at supply and demand for those larger household sizes, we find that the market only has about half of what we need to serve their needs. We have about 50 affordable units for every household of 4 or more people at 50% AMI or below. So we have even fewer options for our families who are looking for affordable rentals. So that's a little bit about what we know in the rental market in Dallas. And we can dig more into that as we go on.
From here on out, folks, let's talk about solutions. Let's go back to Shane here. I want to ask apologize for this, but a 2-part question, okay? It's the economist in me. So I think everyone here will be aware that there's kind of a long laundry list of possible policy tools. They've all been written about a great deal. You have a great many tools in your very fine book, and I certainly recommend The Affordable City to everyone here. But what I'd like you to do is, part one is boil it down. What are the top of mind tools, the policy changes that you think are most impactful and also have the best possibility of being implemented in big cities given political resistance and so forth? That's part one. Part two is, how much difference can it all make? Just how much extra housing can you get out of these top of mind policies? How much difference can it make to the rent?
All right, so for solutions, in terms of the most effective things, something that actually is not in my book, it is the biggest oversight in my book, is I don't really talk about minimum lot size reform, reducing minimum lot sizes. And I think across this country, across other countries actually that have done this in the past 5 to 7 years, it is one of the most effective ways to increase the supply of housing and relatively affordable housing, market rate housing, for a variety of reasons. So this is essentially allowing townhouse, row house style development. There's a lot of reasons that this is very helpful. One is just reducing land costs. The units, while often still large, are not as large as what you're going to get on like a 7,000 or 10,000 square foot parcel out in the exurbs. And really importantly, something I've been paying a lot more attention to lately is townhouses, along with 1 and 2 unit buildings, are the only thing you can build with the International Residential Code rather than the commercial or International Building Code, the costs of which are roughly 20% more per square foot. And so, in addition to that, actually, the ability to have fee simple ownership, not having to have a condo structure with townhouses, also makes it more appealing to buyers who are then just willing to pay more, which makes it easier for developers to serve that market. So at the kind of lower end of the density spectrum, I think minimum lot size reform and making these, these townhouse style developments very simple to build, not having high fees, not having discretionary approval processes, really just saying, here's what you're allowed to build. If you put forward a project that says you want to build that thing, we will confirm that you check all the boxes and you can build it. No other delay needed. Beyond that, we obviously talk about it in every single panel everywhere, the missing middle. It is really essential. This is the housing anywhere from townhouses up to, let's say, 3-4 story apartment and condo buildings, but really everything in between, 4plexes, 8plexes, cottage cluster, accessory dwelling units. All of these things are really important. And firstly, we just have to make it legal to build these things, and we have to make it legal to build them in many places all at once. It can't just be a few neighborhoods here and there, a few parcels, a few corridors. The problem there is when you do that zoning reform, the value of the land often is just captured by the owners, whereas when you do something citywide, region-wide, statewide even, the land doesn't really change in value that much, and instead, the people who are actually gonna live in the future housing are able to capture the benefits in the form of lower rents or sale prices. So there's a lot that needs to happen to make that kind of housing legal or feasible. So firstly is making it legal, and then is addressing things like the code issues, making sure that permitting is quick and by right or ministerial, making sure that fees are minimal. So these are all, it's not just one thing, and so I can't give you a very precise answer on that question, but I do think that minimum lot size reform has proven fairly popular as far as these kinds of reforms go. Everything is controversial. There is no such thing as a non-controversial housing reform, but quite a few cities at the city level, importantly, not being forced by the state, have done this. Houston famously has done this for decades and has tens of thousands of these homes, which even new, they're producing homes that are $300,000 in a city where the median is much higher than that, even for older housing. And so I think I don't want to keep going on forever, so I'll just stop there and say that is one opportunity. We can get into the missing middle and maybe larger scale stuff as well, but most places don't need to go up to 7, 10 stories if everywhere is contributing and building 3 and 4 stories in some communities in adequate numbers.
And in terms of my part two, I think Houston really is the place that has been most studied, right?
Yeah.
The minimum lot size reform, several tens of thousands of units. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Okay, from that reform alone.
Yeah, there were actually a few different reforms going back to the most recent one, or big one, was I think 2013, but this has been allowed since around 1998. And I think the parcels can be as small as 1,400 square feet. And so you can essentially fit 3 homes where you would have previously been able to fit only 1.
Okay. Carol, kind of similar question, but in purpose-built experience in Atlanta and in communities around the country, what works in inducing more homes to get built by the market?
So the first thing I would say is, in the places where we're invited to work, putting your housing strategy in play and thinking about how do you create a mixed income neighborhood over time is really important. Many of our neighborhoods where we're invited to work have a public sector partner who controls a lot of land. Sometimes it's a housing authority, sometimes it's a school system, and we invite them to the table to be partners here. And most of the time, they're willing to contribute their land to the endeavor, recognizing that the folks that they are in business to serve will be better served as a result of these partnerships. So I think these are really important strategies to get public sector partners to partner not just with community quarterback organizations, but with real estate developers and educators and others to realize that together we can do something much more impactful than we can do by ourselves in terms of the outcomes for families. But you can actually build more housing. I think we're excited to see our network members experimenting with things like community land trusts. People are really curious about social housing and seeing if that's something that will work. I would love to see a mixed income federal tax credit that makes it easier to do really true mixed income rental housing, so we really can create more places that will be economically integrated. So there's a variety of strategies. I guess I would come back and say again that all real estate is local, and we're going to have to look at all these policies that Shane's identified and figure out which are the ones that are likely to be most impactful in a particular location, a particular jurisdiction, because there isn't a silver bullet, and what may work in LA today isn't probably what these folks need here today, but they need something different than what LA did in the past. So how do you go through a process that is transparent and inclusive and figuring out to what end? That's the thing that it's like, to what end are you trying to develop a housing strategy? I feel confident that it's not just about units, but that's how we as housers talk about it, right? What are we trying to get to at the end of the day? I think we're trying to get to a robust, economically diverse community where everybody's got a real shot at the American dream.
I do want to just underline, I think that's very important, how housing is the means to an end. It is not the end in itself.
Couldn't agree more. Ashley, here in Dallas and in our great state of Texas, are there one or two top of mind policy changes that you think would make a really big difference for the families you're trying to help?
I would say this could yield some policy changes, but just to build on something that Carol mentioned, we have tremendous opportunity when we think about vacant and underutilized land that's held by our public agencies. So City of Dallas, Dallas County, DISD, Dallas College, Parkland have tremendous vacant land holdings. We also have other entities that have vacant land that could be prime for housing. So if we think about our faith-based organizations in our communities have quite a bit of land and underutilized assets that maybe could be leveraged for housing. In fact, we did a little number crunching at CPAL this summer. We wanted to better understand, well, what's the universe within Dallas County of vacant land that's either publicly held or owned by faith-based organizations, and we found 8,400 parcels in the county that are vacant. Now, we didn't do much beyond that. We didn't look at how they're zoned or the details of the parcels, so I can't say that they would all be ripe for housing. But what might we yield in terms of housing if we created the right set of conditions, which may include some policy changes to activate housing on some of that vacant land? When we think about faith-based organizations in particular, they're already mission-minded, often looking for ways to use their assets in a way that will benefit the community. And so if we can create the right local context, a policy context to support, to activate that vacant land, I think we could make a big dent in our housing needs. I'll also mention something that I think we maybe don't talk often enough about. We're often talking about building new units, that we need to put more units on the ground. We also need to be thinking about how we preserve our existing naturally occurring affordable housing stock. So these are our market rate units that are just sort of, that have kind of depreciated over time and so become more affordable, but they don't have any kind of government subsidy or income restriction on them. Because of the hot market that we're in, our naturally occurring affordable housing is very vulnerable. When we were looking at that forecast to 2030 that I mentioned earlier in the rental housing market, we projected that we stand to lose 87% of our naturally occurring affordable housing between now and 2030, which is around 54,000 units of NOAA just in the city of Dallas. And that's a really important piece of the affordable housing puzzle, is that naturally occurring affordable housing on the market.
You were talking about vacant land. I think our Dallas city government is actually, maybe for the first time, really trying to conduct a thorough audit of all the vacant land that exists. I think Councilman West in the back can nod if that's actually really happening. I read your newsletters and you say it is, so that's great. If we're going to figure out where the vacant land in the city is, there's a lot of it. State policy versus local policy. Shane, you have written, I think very forcefully, on an issue that is controversial in your state, from what I understand, and I know that it's controversial here, which is, are we, given the crisis state that we are in, do the times call for state governments overriding restrictive local rules against the will of their local elected officials? Make the case that this should happen.
Yeah, I think it does have to happen. Firstly, and I can say this as someone who's not from here, and I'm going to leave soon, so you can be mad at me for saying it, I'm okay. I can take it. But cities have demonstrated, by and large, there are exceptions of course, but they've demonstrated that they are not going to, they have not treated the problem urgently or ambitiously. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. I don't entirely blame the local officials for that reality, but it is the reality. It is a vanishingly small share of cities that are really acting ambitiously. Some are making some progress, but even then, they're certainly not acting like it's a crisis. This is partly a collective action problem where it's very easy to free ride. You know, Dallas might build a lot of housing, but then a bunch of suburbs that neighbor it just say, that's great. You guys can do that. We're just gonna maybe take some businesses and get the tax revenue from that, but not worry about more residents, certainly not worry about low-income residents. Part of the appeal of a state mandate of one form or another is it requires everyone to contribute. No one can free ride anymore. And another benefit of that is when no one can free ride and everyone has to contribute some minimum amount or zone in a certain way in some places, however you want it to work, no one city has to bear a disproportionate burden either. Cities ultimately or states rather, they are able to see the bigger picture when cities can say, you know, someone else can solve that problem, but when every city is saying someone else can solve that problem, the problem doesn't get solved. And that is the reality all across the country. Texas is not unique in this regard. I think the last thing, or maybe two things I would say, so politically, just observing other states that have done quite a bit to, for example, effectively eliminate single-family zoning in one way or another. The entire West Coast now allows at least 4 units per residential parcel in single-family zoned areas. Montana, Florida, other places have done similar things. At the city level, it is a fact that people really do get voted out of office for being like good on housing, for doing what it takes to increase production and diversity of housing, allow housing in historically exclusionary and you know, green-lined neighborhoods. At the state level, for whatever reason, voters do not really seem to punish legislators who vote kind of aggressively, ambitiously on housing, who approve these laws that impose these requirements on local governments. In fact, in Oregon, the lead on many of these laws from the past 5 years is now their governor. So I think you just have to grapple with the political reality that cities are very challenged and city council members are very challenged to make this happen. But states, for whatever reason, it's much easier at that level. And the last thing I'll say is this is really not a left, you know, conservative or liberal thing. As I said, the whole West Coast has done these kinds of things, but Montana has done it. Florida actually has the most aggressive upzoning bill in the country by far, basically allowing the highest density residential zone plus 50% in every commercial or industrial parcel in the entire state, essentially. I think Montana is actually maybe a useful model for Texas, might appeal more to the legislators, for example, in that their signature law is not just saying every city has to do X, it's saying here is a list of 14 things, reducing parking minimums, right, fees, allowing duplexes, ADUs, all that kind of stuff. List of 14 things. You don't have to do all of them. You do have to do at least 5, but you get to pick which ones. And so it's leaving a little bit of flexibility for local governments to figure out exactly how they want to accommodate more housing and contribute to solving the housing crisis, but not telling them precisely how that's going to look in their community.
Thanks. I would like to, I have a couple questions that I just sort of want to make jump balls. Whoever wants to leap at this one, not everyone has to answer everything, okay? The next one. I'm a really optimistic guy. Some of my friends out there will know this, but I'm going to say something that's a little gloomy, and then you all can lift me back up again. A couple very prominent economists who have done countless papers on housing, Edward Glaser of Harvard, Albert Size of MIT, have both separately said, we've been calling for the same policy changes for, I think in both cases, probably about 25 or 30 years of their very high-level academic careers. And what record do we have to show for it? Essentially, the policies have grown stricter, and for all practical purposes, everywhere, any serious effort to do the things that, like Shane, you're saying should be done, have mostly failed. And I think that raises the question that they're not failing because the people weren't heard, right? The people were heard all too well. It raises the question, how can leaders persuade ordinary citizens to want to welcome more neighbors into their relatively close vicinity and so forth? What's going to move people's minds going forward? Whoever would like.
I'll go, I guess.
Yeah.
It's all you.
I'm going to actually question the premise a little bit because when people are surveyed about do you want more housing in your community, are you open to more density, the majority of people in almost every survey that I've seen say yes. The problem is we have structures set up in such a way where the no's are really amplified. They are the ones, the reality is if a project is proposed in someone's neighborhood, the people who are okay with it are definitely not going to show up. The people who are supportive of it are probably not going to show up. People who are against something are just much more motivated to make their presence known and show up. And somehow we have to get around that. This is part of the reason I support state preemption, or whatever you want to call it, because you don't have to convince every single individual person. You don't have to get into those individual fights. We were talking about this yesterday, Colin, but the reality is it's a little bit of an elite persuasion movement to some extent to create the framework, the policy framework for cities to actually, and developers, to build the communities that people say in surveys and when polled what they want, but is not being allowed right now because we essentially operate under a vetocracy in most communities, especially at the local land use level.
So maybe it's about changing the processes.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's question number 2, if no one else wants to jump at that one. And that is, this is on my mind a lot. I don't know if it's on you all's, but doing outward expansion of metropolitan areas well. Okay. I know there are plenty of people who will say what we're doing is not sustainable. It can't possibly go on. It sure looks like those forces are pretty strong today. So I want to be part of a message. How can we do this in a way that helps as many human beings as possible? So in the report I'm doing, we're gonna estimate that maybe a reasonable number is that by the year 2050, the whole landmass of all of America's metropolitan areas will go up by something like 12 or 15%. I know people think it'll like double or triple. That's not the case. The population's not gonna grow all that much, okay? But it's still, that's a lot of land. And I did some calculations. If we had the density levels that are realized, not in Brooklyn, but in like some Houston suburbs, versus the extraordinarily low density levels that are reached in some, for example, Boston area suburbs, the difference is more than 10 million units. It's absolutely enormous. How can we do this expansion smartly?
That's way above my pay grade.
Yeah, I don't want to keep answering.
But I do want to come back to the last question for just a minute, if that's okay. I mean, I think part of getting people to see the wisdom of density and change in their neighborhood, I love the idea of making the process less about stopping things and more about being able to move forward with things. That would be a game changer. But what's in it for them? I mean, this is part of the challenge of just thinking about bringing units someplace. It's like, what is it going to mean in a positive way for your neighborhood and your community as a result of this new development, and challenging our developer partners to be thinking about the impact that they can have and talk about it in a different kind of way, and getting our schools jazzed up about new opportunities. I can't help but think about spending a week in Paris not long ago, way pre-Olympics, but everything there is all that walkability in every neighborhood is what everybody wants to do on vacation, yet nobody wants to see it happen in their neighborhood. So how do we start talking about, wouldn't you like to enjoy a Paris-like experience or a seaside-like experience in your own neighborhood? How do we start those conversations in different ways so it's more neighborhood-focused rather than just a project about units being delivered?
Well, that might also speak to my issue about outward expansion. When people go to build the next suburb north of Frisco, north of Prosper, what do they want to, how do they want to live? Do they want to live like what they saw on their Paris vacation? Okay, deed-restricted, affordable housing. Let me come back to the question that I set things up with at the beginning, which is, here, I'm an economist. We live in the world of resource constraints and choices. So, suppose there is something less than infinite money. Ashley, I think it's your turn. You already got started on this. Might want to think about preserving the naturally occurring affordable housing. Are we playing those cards right now, or should we be thinking in some fresh ways about how we deploy the money that is in fact available?
I think we have to think more about, for those government subsidies, where are they best leveraged? And when I go back to the data, our need is the greatest for renters at that 0 to 50% area median income band. And so we have to think about, where is the market already covering our rental needs or getting close to covering our needs, and where is it falling short? Well, it falls short for our lowest income renters. So in the universe of limited resources, I think I would make the case that we think more about how we take those limited resources for use for our lowest income renters. So part of that is thinking about preservation of NOAA, but NOAA might be serving us a little bit higher than that 0 to 30, 0 to 50% income band. But we also need to think about preservation of our existing subsidized affordable housing stock. So in Dallas, we have roughly 18,000 units of subsidized, deed-restricted housing stock that's at risk of losing its affordability restrictions between now and 2050. So 18,000 units that today are already have that deed restriction, are already income restricted for very low-income households. But those affordability covenants are for a certain period of time, and when we lose them, if they're not re-syndicated, then we've lost a really important source of affordable inventory for low-income renters. So we have to think about how do we also protect not just our naturally occurring affordable housing, but our current stock of deed-restricted housing as well. So it's preservation of NOAA, preservation of our existing deed-restricted stock, and then thinking creatively about how do we deliver more affordable units, deeply affordable units. How do we get creative about typologies? How do we get creative about unit size so that we can meet those needs for our lowest income renters?
Okay, Carol and Shane, capital A affordable, how do we stretch those dollars and do as much good as possible?
So I'm thinking generationally now, not just about the families who need housing today. One of the things I love about Ashley's background is that she's one of the people who's an educator and a houser together, and understands the connection between these two, usually siloed industries. How do we think about long-term success of the same kids who are living in affordable housing today not needing affordable housing, or not needing at least the same levels of subsidy, because God knows what the prices are going to be back in 30 years. But how are we thinking about affordable housing as a lever of change and a lever of economic mobility, rather than just putting a roof over somebody's head? Not that that's not important, but if we've got limited resources, we shouldn't just be thinking in the short term. We should be thinking about our long-term play, our long-term strategy to generate more economic mobility for more kids, and how does housing play a role in that?
One thing I wrote about several years ago, based on some observation of California and some other states, is, and that I recommend, is extending the term on affordability for future low-income housing, tax credit buildings, and things of that nature. So I think in Texas it's still 30 years is the term, and when LIHTC was created in 1986, it was 15 or 30. Now it's pretty standard 30, but in California it's 55 years. In quite a few other places it's 55 or even up to 99 years. And one real benefit of this is you don't have to re-syndicate, which basically just means paying all over again to make it affordable for another 30 years, basically at the full cost of the unit. It's very, very expensive to re-syndicate. And so if you can basically just take that off the table for at least twice as long, 3 times as long. You usually can't go past 99 years even if you would like to. But that is one relatively small and very future-looking solution, part of the solution. I will say also something that I think this has already come up in a few different cases, but in terms of the role of the federal government, I think it's unlikely to get involved in land use beyond maybe incentivizing certain kinds of changes. But I don't think they're going to be forcing any changes on states at the land use level. But what they can do that no one else can do is debt finance. And they can create mortgage products that can incentivize the acquisition of existing multifamily by nonprofits or even for-profits in exchange for, maybe you're providing some mezzanine debt, or maybe you're just providing a loan product like you would get to a homeowner. And it doesn't even have to be the government issuing this debt. It can just be they guarantee a loan, again, like they do with the conventional mortgage or the FHA loan for home buyers. So I think that's a real opportunity to create a lot of affordable units, probably often mixed income, maybe only a small share of the units are affordable, but you're taking something that used to be 100% market rate, now it's 10 or 20%, and all you had to do was loan some money that's eventually going to be paid back.
Right.
And I think that's a real opportunity, in part just because it's much harder to get subsidies that are never going to be paid back than just say, we'll give you the money, as long as you pay it back, we're square.
You and I share that interest, for sure. How do we deploy federal debt finance better?
Yeah.
Briefly on the location of where we put capital A affordable housing, I pointed out, Ashley and I were on a panel together recently, pointed out that for all of you Dallasites here, I think everyone here is a Dallasite or close to it, so we have this recent history here. Which is that the city government was accused, perhaps with good reason, of building new affordable housing in a way that concentrated poverty. And then, in a sense, the city reacted with a pendulum going all the way to the other end, and basically said, we're never going to do that again, which meant only building in what were arguably insensitively called high opportunity areas as opposed to low opportunity areas. And the result was, it's expensive and difficult to build in places where the land is expensive and pretty well full. The result was that apartments that are deeply affordable, as per Yardi matrix data, fell after that policy was enacted by about 85 or 90% relative to what had happened before. Is a kind of a self-defeating thing that we did. So I guess the question arises, there's a trade-off here, right? I mean, we want to actually create enough units, but we also want to have them sort of in the right places, even though putting them in the right places means maybe not building as much. How do we deal with that balance, that balancing act?
Well, I think I'd actually pick up on a note that Carol mentioned earlier, and it's just the sort of idea of being a neighborhoodist and thinking more cohesively about development. I feel like often capital A affordable development projects sort of are conceived in a vacuum. They are maybe not always sort of well thought of how to sort of integrate into a larger community, or what kind of mixed use development we might want around a new housing development to make it a really thriving community. So I think that's one. This doesn't quite answer your question, but something I'd like to see us do more of is that more cohesive community planning, where we're thinking about affordable housing developments not in a vacuum, but in the context of what would a vibrant, thriving community around those housing units look like, and how do we bring together different stakeholders, different public agencies, both private sector, public sector, who can come together and take a more complete view of what that neighborhood could look like, so that we're building new units, again, not in a vacuum, but that there are all the assets and amenities that a family might need to thrive. They're being built as well alongside the new housing.
Amen. And I think if we're taking that kind of neighborhood view, figuring out what the mechanisms are in order to make sure that someone is taking the neighborhood view. In our work, we use a function called a community quarterback organization, which is a nonprofit that is focused on this neighborhood and thinking about what does this neighborhood need, not just today, but in 5 years, 10 years, and 50 years, so that it becomes and remains accessible to low-income families and really is a springboard to prosperity for the families who live there. I haven't seen a government be able to do that long-term, right? And so maybe a government could surprise me and be able to do it. But I think the political nature of life and the political nature of a mayor's term makes it difficult for mayors to be thinking only about certain neighborhoods and not the whole city. So having a mechanism in place that can create that sense of both excellence and equity in this work is really essential to driving great outcomes when we're thinking at the neighborhood level.
So here's where we're going. I have one more question for you all, then a kind of a lightning round. Those are fun, right? And then I want you all to weigh in if you would like to. So the one more question, I guess in particular for Carol and Ashley, y'all been living this, Jane, jump in if you want. And that is, what have we learned about how to create neighborhoods, create conditions in which children actually do achieve upward mobility out of poverty? Carol, you want to go first?
Oh, I have lots of thoughts on this one. I think, you know, I would say really, you know, centering resident voice and power in this process is a really important place to start. Neighbors know what they want to see in their neighborhood, and to really help, you know, leverage their voice, their power, a community quarterback organization can uplift that vision, and at the same time continue to build a sense of aspiration and hope about what's possible, because in a lot of places, people have lost hope. So part of our job is to bring hope to communities, or bring a sense of possibility to communities, bring a sense that, yeah, man, you folks are powerful when you're together. So to me, doing all these things together are some of the things that are going to be necessary in order to create the opportunity to attract other public and private investment to neighborhoods, and do it at the same time that you are preserving affordability and accessibility for the legacy residents long term.
Love the message about hope and aspiration. Ashley?
I would add, this is a sort of very specific, but I mentioned earlier that when we look at housing at CPAL, we talk about affordability, quality, stability, and location, and that there's research on all four, that they're all tied to upward economic mobility. Building housing, preserving affordability, that's a long game. That takes years and years and years. But in the meantime, there are families today that are facing housing instability, that might be behind on rent, at risk of eviction, losing their home. So simultaneously, we also have to be thinking about what are the policies, the programs, the funding in place to support and stabilize families now, while we're working on this long-term goal of building and preserving more affordable housing. So here in Dallas at CPAL, we do a lot of work with Dallas ISD to look at the intersection between housing and education outcomes. And unsurprisingly, we see a strong relationship between eviction filing patterns in a neighborhood and then student middle of year move data at the neighborhood school. So in neighborhoods where there's a lot of eviction activity going on, we see lots of student mobility at the neighborhood school. It makes perfect sense. That is really tough for kids, particularly elementary aged kids. We know that if a child in a DISD school has at least one middle of school year move between first and third grade, they have a significantly lower performance on their state achievement tests in third grade. So just huge impact just on one move in the middle of the year that's sort of abrupt and unplanned. So in thinking about long-term economic mobility, we also have to be thinking about that short-term stability for families, both from a housing perspective and also a school perspective. Ideally, we can find ways to identify families early who might be, maybe they've fallen a bit behind on rent or facing a financial crisis in their household. We have to find ways to support and stabilize them so it doesn't get worse, so they don't fall into homelessness, so they can stay housed and kids can stay in school to then realize that upward economic mobility long term.
Love the interconnectedness of all these things. Okay,
I'm going to say one quick thing. One of our network members in Atlanta embedded lawyers in the school, housing lawyers. So if a mom came and said, I need to get my kids transfer information because we're moving, the first person they talked to was a housing lawyer to say why are you moving, and is there something we can do about it? And it reduced the transiency rate in both the neighborhood and in the school. And that transiency is the enemy of academic achievement.
That's very interesting. Okay, so quick lightning round, really brief here, okay? Not counting The Affordable City, which I've already recommended to everyone. Best book people can read to learn more about these issues. Shane?
One that you probably won't hear otherwise, No Place Like Home. I can explain why if you like.
By which author?
Brian McCabe.
Okay, let's just let people look it up in the interest of time here. Carol?
Oh man, I'm gonna say go back and read Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law.
Ooh, I have read that one. That's a good one. Ashley?
This isn't a book, but NYU's Furman Center has a local housing solutions, kind of repository of great policies and program ideas related to housing.
Okay, last lightning round question. In just a handful of words, fewer than 10. What can all of our friends out here actually do with their time, talent, treasure, or otherwise to advance this cause? Ashley, you want to start?
I would say work to debunk narratives where you can. You bring data to the conversation, help educate folks who are maybe not as involved in housing issues. To the conversation earlier about kind of advocates that are like the minority but a loud voice. I feel like my hypothesis is there's sort of a bell curve of people, and there's loud advocates on both ends, and then there's most people in the middle that are sort of neutral or uninformed. Really spend time there.
As with so many things in America
yeah,
today.
that's true. It's
Carol.
true.
I was going to say, rely on CPAL's data and have kind, loving conversations with the people in your life and help them appreciate some of these issues that they may not be thinking about.
Last word, Shane, then we're going to go to the audience.
To your neighbors about where you stand and help them get on board too.
Okay, we got microphones here. What do you all want to talk about?
Do anybody here want to ask any questions? All right, let's do it.
My friend, Ken Malcolmson, thank you so much for starting us off, Ken.
All right, maybe this, okay, so Shane, you had mentioned early on, talking about California, you've mentioned several don'ts. Don't do this. What are those?
What are the don'ts? I mean, the biggest thing by far is the almost exclusive development of single-family housing and just sprawling out indefinitely as the solution to meet housing needs. I think almost everything is downstream of that to some degree. It's left us in a place where, and I'm sure folks in the Dallas metro area can commiserate with this, where densification is especially challenging because everyone is so car dependent that to build density into core areas even when the area is so large and so much of it is not connected by transit, or good transit at least, leaves you in a really difficult transitional space where you have to build and build and build for quite a while before it really becomes feasible to support transit and walking and biking. So I really think it comes down to single-family zoning, and then it's just a matter of, well, what does this look like elsewhere? It doesn't mean you can't have single-family zoning anywhere, but in Los Angeles County, I would say we're around 80, 85, 90% of residentially zoned land is single-family only. It has to be dramatically lower than that, especially the closer you get into the core.
Whoever else would like to ask things, you can come to the microphones or just project really loudly. Okay,
Come on.
Just
Come on up.
come on up.
Come on up to the microphone so everybody can hear you.
And if anyone else wants to just make their way to a microphone, that's okay too.
Go for it, Aaron.
Is that Aaron?
Yes, yeah. So Aaron Abelson from HRNA Advisors. Two, I guess, potentially related questions. One, Colum, to your question of persuasion and what are the methods for persuading? I think the reality of Dallas is you don't have to persuade that many people because you could persuade 4% of registered voters and double, if they show up, double those who are making their voice heard in any given election. So I'm curious, beyond Brian Toney's work and in the coalition and so much that is already happening, but are there lessons from across the country on other issues or this issue for mobilizing in targeted ways? I mean, I think like we should be able to convince a lot of people of this, but with the recognition that if you could get a certain number, you're making a dent. And relatedly, we've talked a lot about the role of government, the role of the development community. What about the sort of civic and philanthropic community, some of whom are already doing quite a bit and supporting the work, but the scale of capital need we're talking about is not just going to come from federal government, is not just going to come from municipal government. Are there ways to mobilize that community further and or examples where that's been successful?
I'll start anyway. So in my mind, we're always trying to create a controlled market response because there's way more private sector capital in the world than there is government money or philanthropy. So we want to do the most that we can with a controlled market response. I think we've got a challenge when we think about attracting philanthropy into housing. I think historically, philanthropy has said either the private sector's got it or government's got it, and they didn't see a role for themselves in it. I think that's starting to change, particularly with this housing crisis that we're in now. And I love that we're kind of saying we're never going to let a crisis go to waste. And this is an opportunity to demonstrate that philanthropy might want to invest in really significant ways around land acquisition or land or preservation, some program-related investments, all these different kinds of tools that are in philanthropy's toolbox that can help solve the problem. So I think there's ways forward to do that, but it's imperfect.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Savannah with the DFW Airport. Something that I felt has been missing from the discussion today is the environmental considerations with housing. Earlier with Houston getting a shout out with the plans that they have been doing, I brought up my sister that lives in Houston, and she was saying how that has been great, but also there's been some issues of it exacerbating flooding, and so I was just curious of how environmental concerns are being considered in these plans and these policies. Thanks.
I mean, I can say, so on flooding is like a whole separate issue, and it's an important issue, but density generally is good for the environment because not building a multifamily building in your downtown or an inner ring suburb does not mean that the people who would live in that building cease to exist. They're just going to live somewhere else, and it's probably going to be somewhere that uses a lot more land, that requires them to drive a whole lot more, and so forth. On flooding, I don't know the answer to this because this is not generally an issue in Los Angeles. I do know that in terms of density, or just in terms of like water use, multifamily uses a lot less, partly because it just doesn't have as much lawn. Something like 50% of the water used in Los Angeles is just lawn space. But I'm actually curious, maybe Colum or someone else has an idea of like what the best solutions are to kind of capturing rainwater and making sure it just doesn't flow into the street. But frankly, I just can't imagine you compare these townhomes being built in Houston to the freeways all over and the roads. I think it is, like, pardon the pun, but a drop in the bucket. I just don't think those kinds of buildings are the problem by any means. And there's probably plenty that needs to be done off-site in other locations, but letting a little bit more impervious area be the reason we don't build more affordable and more centrally located housing, I think is shooting yourself in the foot.
I was going to say, I could just comment on that one really briefly. I think there's obviously incredible complexity around the question. We could have a whole session on that. Just some of the, I've given talks on this a couple times, some of the sort of no-brainer type items, I would say. One, I think Shane said, lots more permeable sources. When we have several hundred square miles all covered in concrete, generally speaking, the water comes and it's really bad. Right. Second of all is in places like Texas, plant a heck of a lot more trees and try to address the heat island problem. That's actually, that's a big return on the dollars invested, I think. And then third, I think we've clearly made a huge mistake when we subsidize, insure, and otherwise encourage people to live in flood zones, which is a giant Houston problem and maybe a mid-sized problem in other parts of the state.
We didn't talk about it, and there's not enough time to talk about it right now, but we should have on our radar screen the challenges associated with property insurance in multifamily over the last few years. It's gone up so much, and some developers are telling me they can't get insurance now. So, I mean, this is a new crisis that is developing on top of the already existing crisis.
Yeah, it's going to be an issue in the next Texas legislative session for sure. It's for sure a crisis. And in Florida, as you all might know, a whole lot of the homes are insured by a state company that is deeply insolvent if they did their accounting honestly, and is begging for a federal bailout already. So just wait for the next hurricane. Last question. I wish we had more, but you're up, sir. Project.
Michael Wade, City of Dallas. What role does design play, especially maybe in affordable housing or mixed and middle housing? I'm thinking about a lot of neighborhood opposition. sometimes isn't just about renters or about extra units, but is about mundane or even ugly design. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's often a view that with the right design, the neighbors will all get on board. I wish that were true. I don't really think it is, but I also don't think that's a reason to dismiss design, because it does matter to people. It matters to me. And so I think the key just needs to be figuring out how to engage people, communities, on the question of, what do you want this housing to look like? We're not going to have a conversation about whether we build denser housing. That's not the purpose of this conversation. But given that we are, how do we make it look in a way that is, as satisfying to you as possible within the constraint of, like, we have to allow at least 3 stories or 4 stories or whatever the rules may be. I think that's at least an important starting point.
So we have covered so much ground today, the first 2 sessions, and just now, I guess I would say, to sum up things, I love the last comments you all made on my lightning round. I mean, to sum up, what we can all do is debunk myths, insist on better policies from our policymakers. After all, we do get the government we deserve. And I love what Carol said, when we engage in conversations on these various tough issues, let's do it with some love and compassion. So would you all join me in thanking GDPC for an amazing event today and our 3 great panelists.
What an outstanding discussion. Yeah, please join me in thanking them one more time for their time and for coming all the way to Dallas to talk about this important housing issue. I hope the leaders and the professionals and housing enthusiasts that are in the room will take what was discussed today and use it to make meaningful change. Change that will help Dallas and the surrounding region implement not only sound housing policy, but meaningful policy of all kinds that will incentivize developers and decision makers to produce the type of housing that Dallas not only needs, but deserves. Thanks again to all of our speakers for making today a success. And to everyone here today, thank you for your continued support, and have a great Friday and an excellent weekend. Thank you very much, everybody.